All right, guys. So last night we got some breaking news from 1996. There was divorce filings from Tara Reade's ex-husband. So here to break it down, I have with me a good friend of mine, Chris Frederick from Political Perspective. We're here to chat about this breaking news. So Chris, I mean, when you saw this, like, what were you thinking? I mean, because this is probably the most bombshell thing that we've seen. Because when the Larry King stuff came out, I thought that that was like the pinnacle. I thought that that was the like. I mean, there's literally a clip of her mother calling in, but this is even more credible because her husband is literally saying this under oath. I mean, this is to a court.
Right. Right. Yeah, and it's kind of reminiscent of 4 years ago when Trump was running for office and things kept coming out and you kind of thought, "Yep, here's the thing that's going to do him in. Here's where it's all going to go downhill." And it just never did, and obviously he made it to office. And you
Mm,
just wonder, is that the same
yeah.
thing with Biden? Although it's almost more complicated because I guess I kind of resent this position that I'm in because I voted for Bernie Sanders and yet now the person that I might have to vote for is Biden, and I'm choosing between two people. In a normal situation, this should be disqualifying for any presidential candidate, right?
Absolutely. Yeah, I mean, this should be completely disqualifying, but because of Donald Trump, right, this isn't disqualifying. And I hadn't made that or thought about that comparison, previously, which is that, yeah, it seems like new hits, new hits, new hits are coming out on Joe Biden. And it's just like, oh, is this going to sink him? Is this going to sink him? Is this going to sink him? But he keeps on keeping on because the media just keeps going on his side. I guess that's the big difference, right? The media was never on Trump's side um,
Right.
previously. But yeah, so when you look at this court document here, and I'm going to put up a picture of the document here for you watching this, but you can see there at the bottom, there's a quote here. So from the bottom here, quote, "It was obvious that this event, speaking about the event of some kind of sexual harassment involving Joe Biden's office, continuing quote, had a very traumatic effect on the petitioner," which is speaking about Tara Reade, "and that she is still sensitive and affected by it today." The first thing that I really thought about this was, I mean, yes, of course, it's still talking about sexual harassment, and Biden bros are quick to point that out to you that this only, supports her previous claim of sexual harassment, but it doesn't, support the idea of sexual assault, which, by the way, has the scrimmage line moved now to the point where, okay, we're no longer debating whether or not she was sexually harassed by Joe Biden. Like, I don't know where the scrimmage line is anymore. I don't know what we're actually debating anymore, because it seems like Joe Biden bros on Twitter are right now defending sexual harassment. Maybe I'm mistaken, but that seems to be what I'm reading. But the first thing that I really thought about here was, yes, this still seems to be bolstering this. It uses the word sexual harassment, but it was traumatic to the point where it's still having an effect on her. I mean, I think
Yeah.
that's the really big news here, because even if you're like critical, like you're like, okay, well, she's changed her story, regardless, something happened to her that was so traumatic that she is still having, like, she's still struggling with it years and years later.
Yeah, and it's one thing to have this conversation about believing women when there's a conversation to be there when it's women you don't know, but these are people that knew her. These people that have come forth, these papers
Hmm.
and the people that they've interviewed previously. These are people that knew her and knew what she was about, and would think would have a pretty good idea to be able to tell when she's being honest, when she's not being honest. You would think her husband, going through that, he's probably has a pretty good idea even though he wasn't there, if she's
Right.
being honest about this thing or not. It seems pretty, I mean, it seems almost inconceivable that the opposite would be true, which is that none of this actually happened,
Right, and that's the
right?
claim that Joe Biden has boxed himself into, that absolutely nothing happened, that there were no complaints at all in my office. And the other very, very a complete bombshell thing that come out of this is that, quoting now again from this thing, he said, the petitioner told me that she eventually struck a deal with the chief of staff of the senator's office to leave that position. So that's also really bombshell, because that suggests that there might be some kind of filing, some kind of paperwork, possibly in the University of Delaware, which Joe Biden is saying that, we shouldn't be allowed to search because that would be too risky, that there might be some kind of paperwork that could, again, corroborate an element of the story. And I'm not sure why the media isn't picking up on that part more of it. There seems to be more,
Hmm.
nitpicking about the sexual harassment versus sexual assault. But that part there, like, if I was an investigative journalist, I would be now looking for that paperwork to suggest that there may have been some kind of deal, some kind of conversation. Um, and yeah, it's definitely really, really interesting. And also it definitely puts the former chief of staff in a bit of a tough position because I believe he's coming out and saying that he doesn't even remember her, if I'm not mistaken. But if they had any kind of conversation about striking a deal to leave, um, it's definitely becoming maybe a little bit questionable there.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think absolutely these things need to be investigated. If there's paperwork out there somewhere that can see the light of day and shed some light on this, I think it needs to be investigated. So I absolutely think in a case like this where it's this credible, we need to do whatever we can to get to the bottom of it. But then part of me also wonders, will it make any difference in the end? Even I mean, short of a video of the thing happening, have the lines already been drawn where people have kind of decided? Because where people say,
Yeah.
maybe Biden did this, but I'm going to have to live with it and go forward and vote with that because there's not a lot of options here. Your choices are someone who probably committed sexual assault or the other guy who probably committed sexual assault.
Well, the other guy, Donald Trump, has bragged about doing the thing that Joe Biden
Right.
was accused about. So
Right.
so that is always that's always fair to mention. But the other thing that did stick out to me in this is I was thinking about the use of the word traumatic here, which is that in the '90s, if I'm not mistaken, like what I've read about sort of clinical psychology, the word traumatic was used differently in the '90s than how it is today. And I mean, I wasn't alive then, so I could be completely off base in saying that. But I mean, this is something that you see the right wing complaining about how, left wingers are just getting triggered. They want to change language and everybody, everything is going to be traumatic and triggering to you. But thinking about not just the word traumatic, but very traumatic, and in the context of the '90s, when the word trauma was used a little bit differently than it is used possibly today.
Yeah.
And that was also very startling to me, looking at this.
Yeah, I mean the I would say as someone who was there that word was used differently in the 90s, but if you listen to what Tara Reade said happened, I think it would be fair to call that traumatic, right?
Right.
It's not her overusing the vocabulary. That seems pretty
Well,
traumatic. And with our understanding of what we have now, you know, even if you just take the sexual harassment charges in the light of day of today, that's still not acceptable. We still can't have someone leading a
exactly.
country like that.
Exactly. Well, I mean, I guess what I was trying to say there was that, they're saying, oh, well, it was just sexual harassment. That's what Biden bros are now saying. Oh, well, it's okay if
Right.
it was only sexual harassment. Then, we're perfectly okay with that. At least that's what some people are saying, it seems. But if it was very traumatic, I mean, what do you even mean by very traumatic but still okay sexual harassment? I'm not sure that that's even like at all possible.
Right.
I guess what I mean. Um, but I guess, this leads to a broader conversation about just like, what are we going to do in terms of the Me Too movement? Because it seemed like the Me Too movement was just about this idea that when it comes to believing women, we need a different standard because the standards of the court of law were not applicable and were not sufficient for these kinds of deeply personal, deeply traumatic, deeply vicious actions that can happen in a domestic sphere.
Yeah, and I mean, I don't know what the answer is. It's such a messy situation because very oftentimes don't have physical evidence in a case that did occur, and
Right.
so it's hard. And part of it, I think, there's a much more enlightened group now. At least a portion of the society is a lot more enlightened about the fact that this kind of thing is unacceptable, even if it's just harassment in the workplace. It's not acceptable. Whereas in the 90s, that was kind of the other way around, where it was the weird idea was to think that you can't talk to women that way in the workplace, and the
Mm,
attitude was kind of, well, what am I supposed to do? How am I supposed to get through the day? Where now it's much more
mm.
accepted that that kind of thing isn't acceptable, but it still puts us in weird situations when it's kind of a he said she said situation, which
Right.
this isn't, because there is evidence supporting her case. But the question is, well, kind of like I mentioned earlier, what is the level of evidence that are going to get people out of what they've already decided about the situation?
Right. Well, I mean, it seems like we're definitely looking for different things, right? Like we don't want to. like it seems like the kinds of evidence that we are looking for in these kinds of cases are just corroborating. Like it seems like at least that's what I took out of the Me Too movement, that it wasn't just a moral claim about, we need to be inclined to believe women because that's, how a good person would sympathize with one another. It also seemed to me like the Me Too movement was making an epistemic claim about that, look, these sorts of things require different sorts of evidence as opposed to just a question of maybe thresholds. I don't know.
Yeah. And it seems to me like if the Me Too movement fired up again the way they were a couple of years ago, I mean, the kind of power that they were wielding, I mean, I think they could get Biden out of there. And
They could,
I
but
wonder if some people are protecting him because they know, and I don't think this would ever happen, but they know there'll be a backlash of people who then say, well, then it should be Bernie, right? Should, if Biden was to step
yeah.
down, but I don't see that
I
happening.
I
There's too
do
many people that don't want that.
I do wonder what would have happened if, I mean, this would have been a terrible alternative world, you could argue, but what would have happened if the second place person wasn't Bernie but was someone like Amy Klobuchar or Pete Buttigieg?
Right.
Like I wonder if I genuinely wonder if Joe Biden would have stepped down, especially I think Amy Klobuchar more likely because, she is a woman, and then she could more or less come out if she decided to play hardball in that, alternative, terrifying world. She could come out and
Yeah.
play hardball and basically be like, I think this is really credible. I think that he should step down. Um, I wonder about that world sometimes. I wonder.
Yeah, because it seems like maybe that Me Too movement had its full cycle, like lived its full life cycle, and isn't there anymore because we still have people coming out and endorsing Joe Biden after these allegations. I mean, they're still standing by him instead of saying, "Whoa, this changes the calculation." Yeah, I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, because I mean, there was Matt Iglesias on Twitter last night who was basically saying, "Oh, well, this is basically nothing because it's just about sexual harassment. Don't worry about it. Don't worry about it." I mean, I wonder, like, how long can these people keep up with this? I mean, look, I don't want to say that anyone knows for sure. Like, I don't know 100% what happened. Nobody knows except for Tara Reade and except for Joe Biden, if he remembers. I mean, so but it does seem like you have to at least acknowledge that this is a credible allegation. And it seemed to me, at least my understanding of the Me Too movement, was that if there's a credible allegation, we should morally be inclined to believe the vulnerable woman as opposed to the powerful man. That was my lesson. I guess I misunderstood it.
Yeah, and it's like where are those voices now? Those
Where are
voices
those
that were
voices at?
calling out and tweeting and everything that got a lot of work done. They put up a lot of spotlight on stuff. Where is that now? Which I guess is the big question about the way the media is handling the whole Biden thing. It's bizarre.
Yeah, it really is. It really is. Well, thank you so much. Thank you so much for joining us, Chris.
Yep.
I'll be sure to leave your channel down in the description for those of you who are interested in that. Your Twitter. Thank you guys for joining us.
All right. Thanks.